Industrial Revolution 2 and Realism True. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is February 3rd, 2021. And on this date in history, 97 years ago, the world did us a favor and killed off Woodrow Wilson. Yeah, so he's dead, had a massive stroke in 1919, and spent a lot of his presidency trying to make a name for himself for posterity. But one of the things he should have made a name for himself for was having the first movie ever shown in the White House to be Birth of a Nation, the movie about how the KKK saved the South from black people. Cheerio there, Woodrow Wilson. So the French philosopher Auguste Comey has this theory called positivism. Okay, and basically history is going to progress through three stages: the theological, the metaphysical, and the scientific. Okay, and it must rely on a hard-nosed and empirical investigation of reality. He argued for a science of society or sociology, and this would become a new type of secular religion, but basically a great focus on how everything works. Okay, so he is really the leader of this movement to study sociology. Realism literature. This is going to focus on the world as it really was. Charles Dickens, on the one hand, compelling characters in a world of sooty cities. So if you're reading some of his stories, you can tell how dirty everyone is, how crappy life is, corrupt businesses, cruel orphanages, it shows the real darkness of society. We've got Hard Times up there. You've got Oliver Twist. You can also put up A Tale of Two Cities, but all of these together are just kind of the same type of, dark, dirty themes, trying to catch reality. Gustave Flaubert, he writes Madame Bovary, and the main character really becomes disillusioned with her life. She sees her life going one way. She has a large number of affairs, but feels very empty, and eventually she's going to kill herself. Okay, so we live in a society where we have uplifting stories. These are really downlifting and depressing. William Thackeray writes Vanity Fair, and this is a novel without Vanity Fair, a novel without a hero. Okay, and it follows two girls, their friends and family. This is a really long-running series. They've made several TV shows off of this, and even after he dies, this series continues to follow these same girls. So you can actually look at some research on this. So realism art. Again, you're going to show a type of people that you never did before. In the beginning, what we're looking at is commissions of wealthy lords and ladies, people that could afford to pay a painter to just paint for them. Here, the French painters in realism are going to show landless peasants and exhausted factory workers, just kind of paint just the actual conditions that they're going through. Kind of the same type of things that Charles Darwin's writing about, they're painting about. So Jean-Francois Millet, he paints the sower and the gleaners. They're doing back-breaking work up in the picture up on the top left-hand side. That's what they're going to be doing all day, and it just kind of gives a different image than what you see in a lot of art before then. Gustave Courbet, he did the Stonebreakers, and it shows two men crushing stones for gravel. Okay, you can see that there's no clear faces in any of these images. It's just kind of an amalgamation of people. Just the way that they're standing, the way that they're bent. Uh, Again, it's much different than a lot of the work that was captured before. Okay, so Franz Liszt was a child prodigy and one of the greatest piano players of all time. And he starts the modern recitals. Okay, the symphonic poem was an attempt of using music to make a literary or pictorial idea. And this is something he helped develop. Sorry, just a little bit of a glimpse into some of the music of Franz Liszt, and about to move into to Wagner. Okay, Richard Wagner, for many people, is one of the greatest musicians of all time. I mean, he inspired several different generations of the of Germans, Hitler in particular. Um, so so he created what was really, you might refer to as a total work of art. Okay, or Gesamtkunstwerk. Okay, so he would combine all types of artistic genres. And this really was something that was inspirational to the entire culture. He also created this ridiculously long opera. There were 4 operas together that spanned a total of 16 hours. Now I'm going to play you just a little, probably about a 30-second clip from Wagner. I'm sure you've heard of this before. The most memorable part comes up here about now. Some very influential music from Germany at that time. Okay, so continuing with the Second Industrial Revolution, mass production or the assembly line was created by Henry Ford. And the big problem with producing really complicated items was it would sometimes take skilled tradesmen days and days to do the work. But Henry Ford, what he does is he breaks things down into simple tasks for unskilled workers. So while a skilled laborer might, take, hours and possibly even days to do something, they might break that down into 10 different steps. And the truth is, the more that you handle that product, the more that you'll notice the imperfections that would keep it from working the way that it should. So if you can make a car in an assembly line, then you can make any other type of product after that. And it makes products much cheaper. Also, this is a time period where you have electricity, so you can have powered lights inside of a factory. You're not going to have the steam and heat of a steam engine, so it just makes it much more efficient. You also have streetcars and bigger factories at the time. Now, another great innovation had to do with steel, and this was the Bessemer process. So what they did is they would use a byproduct of coal called coke. Now this is not cocaine nor Coca-Cola, but this is an item that whenever you heated it got much hotter than coal, and so you could use that to really make a much better tempered steel than you could with anything else. So this is really an innovation that was done under Carnegie, and it turns Carnegie really into a multimillionaire, nearly a billionaire. Okay, it lays the foundation of the railroad because iron and other metals would not have held up to the weights of the trains, and also it's used for reinforcing steel and for reinforcing concrete, and also makes it possible to build skyscrapers. So that's what the introduction of steel does, and we have to thank Andrew Carnegie for that. I'd say thank you, but he is super dead. So, you know what, Andrew? Build me a library. Anyway, if you don't remember what that's all about, then anyway, I'm moving on. Corner. Innovations, okay? So Great Britain actually has its first power station about 10 years earlier than they do in the United States, okay? You also have coal power, and you have hydroelectric stations that would power cities as well. You have the invention of the light bulb. It was done in the United States by Thomas Edison, and it was done in Great Britain by Joseph Swan. And so they both made the light bulb at about the same time. Being in the United States, of course, it was done by Edison. The telephone, another great innovation. Okay, Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone. He makes it, and the first call is to his assistant Watson. He liked to answer the phone ahoy ahoy, which, by the way, is so much more fun than the crappy way we do it now. Sometimes I'll just hear what. He also created the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, which became AT&T, and that's what AT&T actually stands for, American Telephone and Telegraph Company. Okay? So, but you still have the problem of how do I get messages across the Atlantic Ocean? And this will move to the next phase of this, and this is under Guglielmo Marconi. And he was able to send and interpret radio waves so that you could basically send sound from one place to the next. And it made it possible to send them across the Atlantic Ocean. But it's also a time period where you see that we're no longer as dependent on horses as we were before, and maybe we won't have to clean up about 5 to 10,000 dead horses on the street a year. So, mazel tov. Okay, the internal combustion engine. This is something that's still the basic system in automobiles today. And it was invented in 1878. Now, Carl Benz invents the car in 1885. It was not invented by Ford, so get that notion out of your mind. He invented it in Germany. You can see a picture of it up on the top left-hand side. It looks much more like a tricycle, but really this is the first car. And the first person to drive this was actually his wife. Now, some other innovations of the time were steamships. And these are no longer dependent on the wind, so you could actually go across the ocean much faster in a steamship than you could by sailing. Going from ocean to ocean becomes a lot easier whenever the British build the Panama Canal when the British build the Suez Canal in 1869, and the Americans under Theodore Roosevelt build the Panama Canal in 1914. This actually makes it so that you don't have to sail around Africa or South America to get to other parts in the world. It is expensive to use, however. Now, Gottlieb Daimler, he invents a light engine that makes cars possible. He would become one of the founders of Daimler Chrysler. Well, actually, Daimler was a competitor of Chrysler, and they combined the two companies together. Now it's time to talk about one of my favorite ways of traveling, which was the Zeppelin. Actually, kind of was probably a cool way of travel where you could fly high above everything. It wasn't a really quick way of traveling, but you could get across the Atlantic in it. Actually, I think it was faster than steam travel. Uh, and Zeppelin travel was going really well until this little accident called the Hindenburg, where like 12% of the people on the Hindenburg were on it and blew up and killed everyone. You know, well, 12% anyway. So maybe not everyone. Wilbur and Orville Wright. These two cats were from Ohio, and they had a bicycle shop. And Orville was like, "Hey man, let's go and invent an airplane." Wilbur was like, "Sure. Can we use some airplane parts to make it lighter?" And they're like, "Yeah, high five." And they go, "Well, we can't do it in Ohio. Let's go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina." And so they did. And so they went there and they flew a plane. It went about 120 feet on the first flight. Took about 12 seconds for it to go that distance. But later on that day, they flew a little bit longer, and they invented the plane. They high-fived. They're like, "Yay, we invented the airplane." And it's science. Okay. The transatlantic cables. Now, this was a great innovation, but it was ridiculous because they had these cables that went all the way from the United States to Europe, and actually from South America to Asia to Africa, and also up to Europe. And so you're able to send all these messages all the way across the water, and they would receive them instantly. Okay. Also during this time period, you have standardized time zones. This is for the railroad. They need to make sure that people were arriving on time for the railroad so it could take off on time. And in order to do that, you had to have standardized time to make everything run a little bit more smoothly. Okay? And so they create standardized time, and they have come up with a system for time zones as well. The boom-bust cycles. Okay? Now, this is something that regularly happens in a capitalistic society. You would, from time to time, have major periods of overproduction, and this would lead to massive recessions. Okay, and also the price of certain things that you needed or wanted commodities. This is going to lead to fears of worker unrest and corporate bankruptcy. Again, the big terror is that the poor would unite and rise up against the rich. Monopolies controlled an unpredictable market. So they controlled the price, production, and everything but the cost of the item themselves, but they would raise prices so they would become very wealthy. Europe actually is going to move back towards having protective tariffs in the 1870s, and the United States will raise its tariffs towards the end of the century as well. They were lowered whenever income tax was started, but then they were raised up quite a bit by the end of the century, and that'll happen again in the late 1920s, early 1930s. Cartels or independent enterprises would work together to control prices and production, like U.S. Steel, Rhine-Westphalian Coal Syndicate. In the United States, they would actually ban these type of practices that were also known as pools. Although not the kind you swim in. Okay, so there was a massive Great Depression that happened in the late 19th century. It actually happens in the United States and happens in Britain, France, and Germany. The price of agriculture fell dramatically. There were all types of innovations in agriculture, so for the first time, there was a lot more produced than was needed to be sold. That could be sold. So farmers had a hard time continuing to produce whenever they weren't making any money off of it. Now, Britain does buy their grain abroad and is still buying things like cotton and tobacco from the United States. During this time period, Western Europe is going to have a very high standard of living, and this is going to be much different than what's going on in Eastern Europe, which is still kind of in the throes or the aftermath of the end of feudalism, and just a very large population of impoverished people. Western Europe also has good transportation, trains, trolleys, and the beginning of the subway, and a much faster way to move from the Atlantic to the Pacific. People were a lot healthier during this time period also. You also have a much higher level of education in Western Europe as opposed to Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, though, is going to provide food and raw materials to the West. Okay, and this is for some people, not for everyone, but Le Bon Marché is the first department store, and it was started in 1852. S'il vous plaît, un soufflé. I don't know. It's kind of French. German industrialization. So the greatest two industrial powers at the end of the 19th century were Germany and the United States, and this will set them up to be the world powers that they were at the beginning of the 20th century. Okay. Germany really focused on organic chemicals and electrical equipment. Okay, and it will advance into weaponry and other things as well. A British man by the name of William Henry Perkin created artificial dyes while trying to make quinine for malaria. So he's trying to make a cure for malaria and accidentally creates a dye, and Germany will actually go to control the market and make 90% of the world's dyes by 1900. So Germany becomes a major factor in world trade in a short period of time after the creation of their nation. And I feel like I should say something that rhymes with creation of their nation, crustacean, inflation, conflagration. Okay, I think I'm done. Okay. By the way, those last words don't mean anything. It's just gibberish. So we reached the end of another day. I hope everyone's having a great day. I hope everyone stays safe. Please don't cocaine, don't AIDS. And if you see a puppy, don't punch it or bite a big chunk out of it. Okay? Be sweet. Okay, this is Mr. Dugdale, and I will see you on the other side. Peace, love, and no COVID.